Well, hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Um, Always feel like I'm at home. And being here with everybody wherever you are is also being like home. So today I'm going to speak about the third point in the Lojong, which is bringing all that we need to the path. And first, of course, I will be talking about Dharma protectors. So I always bring my Dharma protector, right? This is Zag, who is, what are you manifesting today? Is it suchness or emptiness? Non-duality. Okay, so we're in good hands, right? So you'll come back later, okay? Right? So what I want to do first is, because we're not that far along in the Lojong, I want to very quickly summarize what we've gone through, so that will help people who may be tuning in for the first time. Okay, so, well, first of all, the point one was training in the preliminaries. And I did this in my first talk, which is recognizing the preciousness of human existence, which is something we really can overlook. The whole thrust of Lojong and using these slogans is to look deeper and deeper into ourselves. So that question of who we are, what it means to be human, how lucky we are, we're glad we're not born as an aardvark or a lobster, right? We take advantage of that. But then we also see the nature of our predicament by looking at impermanence. And we also see that samsara is limited into what we possibly can accomplish. So it's the unsatisfactoriness of samsara that we acknowledge. And actually, I was reading Master Dao Sheng, who was a 4th century and 5th century Chan master, who said that there is no such thing as a good act if it's in samsara. So it's a very sobering kind of observation. We think that, I don't know what, some kind of Mercedes-Benz or the world's most delicious cheesecake will be what will fix all of our problems, but it's probably not the case, although we hope it is. And then lastly, we recognize the responsibility and the possibility of karma itself, of our actions, that we can actually turn things around. That is really the good news. So that's the first point of Lojong. And then I went through 2 parts of bodhicitta, the absolute and the relative. So absolute bodhicitta is really no different from pure mind, the Dharmakaya, emptiness. It is a unified, non-differentiated state. This is our potential. It's who we are in our depth in a certain way. But then there's relative bodhicitta. So one way of looking at relative bodhicitta is, now that we understand that we have Buddha nature, which is what absolute bodhicitta is pointing to. The question is, how do we find it? How do we see it within ourselves? How do we see it within others? And in going over the absolute bodhicitta, we talked about basically meditative techniques of seeing everything as a dream, of examining unborn awareness, of not getting caught in the antidote, right? Very important. We always have to self-check ourselves as we're going through the path, right? Because we can get hung up in many different ways. And then there was resting in alaya consciousness, which is setting down and resting any kind of vows or attachments, and then off the cushion being a child of illusion. So that's kind of a transition from the absolute to the relative bodhicitta. And then last time, what I talked about was the actual methods of relative bodhicitta, which basically refer to Tonglen, which is this giving and receiving. It's a meditation technique very popular in Tibet and in other parts of Asia, which has to do with recognizing other people outside of yourself, recognizing suffering, which could be inside you, could be in other people, and doing kind of a manipulation, a way of looking at things so that you're not so caught up in your thought processes and your emotions, which is our normal state. Along with that, in Relative Bodhicitta, there was this ninth slogan, which was three objects, three poisons, and three virtues, which is one little slogan, which is basically the entirety of the path, if you will. The objects being what we're attached to in terms of being pleasurable, not pleasurable, or neutral, and how those kinds of clinging cause our attachments to arise of greed, hatred, and ignorance. When we can see this process, that seeing, that recognition, that refraining becomes the three virtues. And then the last part of the Relative Bodhicitta was to always practice with the slogans. And I expanded that to mean to always use the Dharma to ensure that you have a continuity of practice. And there really is this emphasis about how our practice is on the cushion and off the cushion. And ultimately, there should be no difference. But for us ordinary sentient beings, there can be a big difference. So now, in 5 minutes, I caught us all up with three different lectures. So now we're on point 3, which is bring all that we meet to the path. This is, all of these slogans can easily be misunderstood. When we first hear it, especially slogan 11, which is turn or transform all mishaps into the path of Bodhi, it sounds impossible, and it sounds like we're trying to engender a feeling of martyrdom, of like, oh, I don't care what happens to me. I'm just cool with it. You know, a hammer falls on my foot. Oh, isn't that lovely? You know, I can really deal with pain. So that's really a misunderstanding. It's really recognizing how we attach to a certain desire for continuity, a certain desire which says, well, I want things to go my way and I don't want things to go ways that I don't want. As a matter of fact, I was watching on TV. There's a new show, I think it's on Prime. It's called Couples Therapy, and it's a reality show. And I really couldn't believe it, but actually a variety of couples, partners, gay and straight, go to a particular therapist for counseling. And it's all filmed. Everything is filmed. What they say, what the therapist is saying. So one of the first couples, the man sat down and said, look, I'm really a simple guy. I want what I want. When I'm hungry, I want to eat. When I want sex, I want sex. What's the problem? Why aren't I getting what I want? So this guy is something of a narcissist, one would say. And then once again, in giving an example of something like that, I think it's important to then watch your own criticism and reaction to it, because part of it would be saying to oneself, well, I'm certainly not like that. I'm much more open and giving and less demanding. And when you get caught in things like that, you can start to avoid your own narcissism, the things that you're blind to. And what this practice, I mean, all Buddhist practice in a certain sense, is about developing mental acuity, seeing things clearly. And that's what we're really trying to do. So one of the first things that we can train ourselves in and is to not be alarmed by bad circumstances. And by the same token, not be totally caught up in pleasing circumstances. So we can learn not to panic. And as Pema Chodron says, and of course, in preparing this talk, I've used many different teachers and their writings. Pema Chodron says to really see that there are no interruptions in our lives, because everything's an interruption. Everything is a fresh moment, right? And Tibetans talk about the bardos, which have very specific meanings about what's going on in our life and in meditation and what happens after life. But there's also a sense that there are bardos at every moment, right? We're always in between things. One moment is passing, another moment is about to arise, and we're in this moment, which, as the Diamond Sutra says, is ungraspable in itself. So it's good to recognize those kind of things. And to make sure that our insight doesn't get destabilized, that we keep a certain level of equanimity and balance. And one of the tools for that is to develop patience, and patience will come up again. And patience is having a really wide view of seeing the workings of impermanence, seeing the insubstantiality of life and the non-sustainability of life. Nothing that we really try to build and hold on to, and especially with pride, is definitely going to turn out how we want. And the more we can stand back, and we talk about turning the light around inside, and then being what one of my teachers also talks about is being ready for inner change, because that's where everything is going to happen, right? In our practice, really. We have some ability to affect the outside world and other people, but it's very limited. And, when we talk about things going on around the world, it's in the moment, it's kind of non-existent. We can't stop all the, there are approximately 120 wars going on around the planet. And of course, we hear mostly about certain wars, but we can be helpful as we can, but we can't change things to our liking. And so that's using wise discernment. And you have to be able to see when you're working in that mode and not be run over by your wise discernment, not to get filled with your feeling like, oh, I'm so wise and I really see through these things and everyone else doesn't. So one story that's often told in how difficult this can be, right, is the story of, I read it with Bo Jui, and it might be Sudong Po, but we'll go with Bo Jui, the Tang Dynasty poet, who visits the bird nest master, the bird nest master. He was a great Zen practitioner in the Tang Dynasty who sat and practiced in a tree, which the people who came to visit him told him how dangerous that was. And of course, he said to them, well, look how dangerous what you're doing is. You don't even know what you're headed for, being totally caught up in your attachments. Your world is much more dangerous than mine. And then Bo Jui asked him, so what is the basis of your teaching? What is the most important thing that we should take away? And the bird nest master said, do only kind, beneficial, wholesome deeds, refrain from evil, unwholesome deeds, and purify your mind. And Bo Jui said, well, that's ridiculous. Any 3-year-old knows that. And the bird nest master said, well, any 3-year-old might know it, but no 80-year-old can do it, right? So we have to be clear about where we are, what we can do and what we can't do. And Trala Kyabon counsels us to be vigilant, not defeatist. And one of the things also that's really important, and this will come out more when we talk about accumulating merit, is really becoming more skillful with our own issues and the way we deal with other people. And what's starting to happen in this, the Lojong as it's unfolding, is it becomes more focused on our everyday interactions, the kind of things that we can get caught up in, like jealousy or pride. And it's really bringing our attention to these things so we don't get so caught up to them. And so Chandra Kirti says, attachment to one's own belief, aversion for another's view, all this is thought. Right. And we don't think that way. No, it's not thought. That's my opinion. That's reality, and don't you mess with my reality. That's kind of how we often act. And then Kentrel Rinpoche says, clinging is the root cause of suffering. Remove that. Recognize that we produce the causes. Right. As another Rinpoche said, we love the causes of suffering. We don't like the fruits of it, but we don't see that. So this is really counseling us to awaken to causes and conditions and our part in them and how they really work. Attachment to the self is the true culprit, he says. Look to our selfishness and actions in the past. Our blaming mind feeds our suffering. And we'll see this in the next slogan. Selfishness is not the self. It's an interesting statement that bears some contemplation. Selfishness is not the self, not the true, of course, not the true self. It's not who you are. The issue is a belief in self, and that belief in self is one of the major, if not the major, issues in maybe all Buddhist practice. How is it that we are manipulated by an illusion? It's rather remarkable. Pema Chodron says that bodhisattvas can be understood as an awakening warrior. We're dealing with both the serene and the chaotic quality of life, and we're trying not to get caught in either. And so we can, appreciate and deal with what's unwanted. And another really important thing is to admit that you're hurt, right? Which we often don't. And one of my favorite quotes, or as a bad example, is from She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. It's a movie with John Wayne where he's a soldier of some type. And throughout the movie, he's always saying, don't apologize. It's a sign of weakness. And if you take that attitude, you're not really examining yourself. You're not really looking in. You're not admitting that you're hurt. And then what Pema says, and I think this is also very, very helpful, rather than blame, she talks about how can I communicate, right? A very different thing, really, how hurt I am, how hurt you may be. Can I see this getting beyond my normal obscurations? So eventually what we see is it's not us against them, it's us and them all together. And I appreciate her honesty. She talks about seeing someone with reading about a case of child abuse, and she was a mother at first before she became a nun, and she recognizes there were times when her children were so disruptive and unruly that she could understand being abusive. Now, of course, she didn't do it, but that ability. This is the thing that John Keats talked about as negative capability, right? Which is the ability to deal with doubt or perplexity without reaching in after any kind of reason or solutions. Really, the dark things that come up not to turn away from them, not to act on them, of course. We don't want to act on these things, but these really are part of who we are at the moment. Not who we truly are, but it's not who we're not. So, and I think it's difficult to hear and it's difficult to practice, I think. So moving right along, this goes very nicely into the next slogan, which is drive all blames into one. Another slogan that can be easily misunderstood. So I was speaking to a friend who just had a knee-jerk reaction to this, which is, wow, we're all walking around, we're so guilt-ridden. We all have such poor self-images. We're so hard on ourselves. And now you're telling me to like a bill payer loan, put all this together and feel even more guilty. So it's quite the opposite of that. I just wanted to introduce it that way. So one of the things Pema says is that looking at all the wars and understanding that everybody wants to be happy and each side thinking they would be happy if the other side just disappeared. That doesn't solve the problems. So one of the things is we use these slogans. They're really tools, right, of analysis to question the things that we're holding on to and we're not even aware of holding on to. I think that's one of the most amazing things, the things that are jiggling around in our minds and we just don't notice the jiggling. We think we're in the state of reality. So what this drive all blames into one, continuing from the last slogan, is really looking at the underlying anxiety, the softness, the uncertainty, the fear that's really way down beneath, our kind of striking out at the world and our running away from the world. And so we really have to start with ourselves and really look at how these things arise in us, really get to know every part of ourselves. And this I think is Chan practice as well. I mean, it's not just Lojong practicing silent illumination, Watto. These things are coming up. And Jimmy Yu always says, as you're practicing, you keep seeing these things and you keep exposing them. You're not pushing them away. You're not turning them. You're exposing them. And by exposing them, you are taking fuel away from them. You might not make them disappear in the moment, but you're going in the direction of not continuing. And of course, what all of this can really be applied to the four proper exertions, right? So I might as well mention them right now because they work through all of these slogans. The idea of removing or not giving fuel to negative things that are in our minds and maintaining a state where negative and unwholesome things are less likely to come into our minds. And then inviting or cultivating wholesome thoughts into our minds. And fourth, maintaining that kind of mind where the wholesome attitude is sustained. Those are the four noble exertions, and they can work in using these slogans. So we can further ask, what does blame feel like, right? Right? Because it's such a knee-jerk reaction. You made me so angry, Why are those people doing that? Those people should know better. It's just, this is a very easy motion to do, wagging my finger, and it's not doing very much, giving a little bit of exercise to my wrist, I think, so it'll help me live a little longer, but it doesn't work. Blaming doesn't work. And then you can look even beyond the blame to a general sense that something is wrong. There's an underlying thing. And I've spoken about this in the past, and I really always like to bring this up. The teaching of Samvega, this disquietude, the feeling that there's something wrong. And this is something that actually gets people into the practice in the first place. My life isn't quite working the way that I liked, that I would like, and I don't know what's wrong. But I'm admitting that I'm sort of at a dead end, and that is coupled with pasada, which is this feeling of confidence and contentment, which is nice if you can have it. Usually, we're just embroiled in the samvega, but if we can see this samvega, and this is something one of my teachers says, that you may have samvega right up to, the eighth bhumi of being a bodhisattva, right? Because you're concerned not so much about yourself at that point, but about the welfare of other sentient beings. And so, this is something we can look into, and I think this samvega is something, this longing to practice, to be a better person, to actually uncover your Buddha nature. As Dogen Zenji says, we are Buddha nature. To really look into that, that's very important, and it's something in a sense beyond space and time. It's something that we've been carrying with us, and it's good to look into it. So one of the things that is important in working with the slogans is that we have to find our own way. All of the teachings that we have are obviously, they're helpful, they're wonderful. We take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. But I question this in myself, right? Having practiced for a long time. I mean, what have I really absorbed in my practice? I mean, I've heard, I don't know how much Dharma, from here to Timbuktu and back. And I'm very committed, very careful, but I recognize that some things bubble up in my mind and other things sink down. And maybe I'm not really getting the whole picture. So when you find your own way, you're really also admitting this, being in touch with what's really going on. What am I actually doing? What do I think I'm doing? Right? They're not always in sync. I'm being so kind to this person, right? But they're trying to get away. They have an appointment. They don't want to talk to me, right? I'm just locked into my desire to be a good person. I'm not really related to what the situation is doing. So that's something where we can start to see our habitual tendencies. We can ask, what is it we really want? What's true? And can we actually get what we want? I mean, are the motions that we make towards what we think are our goals, how realistic are they? Maybe they're more realistic than we think, but we really have to examine these things. So we can see that there's no need to have a knee-jerk reaction to situations. This is something Rebecca Lee talks about a lot in her new book, Illumination, about how we're continually beset by our reactivity because we're just tightening up and pigeonholing the actual experiences we have, and then we're getting caught in the greed, hatred, and ignorance. So, once again, they often recommend using Tonglen in these kind of things. And I think just being aware of your breath, being aware of your body, using Chan methods can see that the one, remember this slogan is drive all blames into the one. And now I'm going to give a description of what the one is, but that doesn't mean that it's utterly correct. It means that it needs some contemplation, some looking into, but the one that you're driving all the blame into is your ego clinging. That's really it. And when you see that, if you really see that almost anything that you blame, anything that you take exception to, anything that you want to manipulate in a particular way, there's probably some way that it's rooted into your ego clinging. And from the formless verse, from the Platform Sutra, it says, if I witness others' faults and I fault them, then I'm at fault. And when others fault from me, I ought to refrain from criticism. Otherwise, I am in the wrong. So this kind of understanding is prevalent throughout the teachings, throughout the schools. And then the next verse in the formless verse says, however, just discard this faulty mind and vexations disintegrate. When love and hate have no gateway into the mind, relax and stretch out your legs, which is what I'm doing right now. But I haven't quite stopped these things from coming in my mind. So this is really what the Lojong is pointing to. And there are so many other ways of looking at this. This is what's fascinating about studying this. So Norm Fisher, right, who is a Zen master in a Japanese Soto tradition, he says, don't blame others. He says, eat the blame. It will make you stronger. Another way of looking at it, right? You have to see what's possible for you. And he talks about this story of a Tenzo, the cook at a Zen monastery, who was unmindful when he was making a soup, and by some strange turn of events, a snake's head got in the soup. And when he pulled it out and the Zen master was there, without blinking an eye, the Tenzo just ate the snake's head. So he just accepted the situation. I don't think I could do that. I would probably run away screaming, but then I'm not a Tenzo. But this is, things that we're looking into. So Trala Kyabun says, handling difficulties and coming out of them a better person are the whole process of the Lojong teachings. But we can only do that if we're not always defending our egos. And that to me is a very tall order, right? Because I would like to be right all of the time. Another one of my favorite quotes from Gore Vidal. So all the problems in the world could easily be solved if everybody would just listen to me. It seems so simple, right? So, and then Shantideva says, and Shantideva always tells it like it is. Oh, my mind, what countless ages have you spent working for yourself? And of course, he's talking about the unenlightened mind, the grasping mind. And what weariness it was while your reward was only misery. Right? So Shantideva is looking at this whole process. So that's, so we've explored slogan 12. Now, let's explore slogan 13. Be grateful to everyone. Once again, very easy to misunderstand, misuse this. Everything's great. All the muggings, the wars, whatever. I'm just so grateful to all these people, right? That's not really what it's about. It's not about acquiring an attitude like all the slogans, right? It's more about examination, right? Looking inside. And so Pema says that what this slogan is making peace with the aspects of ourselves that we have rejected. That's also some of the things that I'm saying in this talk I think, really take a long out breath, and I should really contemplate that for a long time, because it's really quite interesting. I mean, even to recognize that we have rejected part of ourselves. It's a rather momentous statement. And she follows this up with saying, other people trigger the karma we haven't worked out. So the gratitude is really a very expansive thing. Inside and outside, we're really looking at the process of how we're working with other people. So once again, we have basic wisdom. It's something that we can recognize, our birthright of wisdom, and we can change our attitude. We can look into it. And you can admit, this is the other thing, that you're not grateful. This is also about being grateful for everything. You admit that you're not grateful. You're pissed off, right? You can't manipulate things because you put on a happy face when you're crying inside. I think there's a song about that. So all situations can teach us, right? There's no pat solution. Actually, Pema mentions how she had an interview with one student that went really well, and she felt really good. And then another student came in, and she maintained this attitude. So she really wasn't with the new student, right? And here's someone who's been practicing for a very long time and recognizes that they can fall into this trap of clinging to pleasant feelings, clinging, I like clinging also, clinging to ego states. So we really want to push annoying people away. That's pretty much how we often feel. But when that happens, we really have to look and see if that really helps as much as we might think. Has our actual unborn, well, not unborn, or are born for a long time reactivity, our way of reacting to situations negatively, always trying to self-protect, has that actually gone away when the incipient cause of a negative ego state has disappeared? Something to look into. So one thing, I actually learned this on the first retreat I ever went to in 1975, even though I'm only 25 or whatever. Anyway, what the teacher said was, there are 4 people in your life you can never get away from, which is the person that you hate, the person you love, the person that you're neutral towards, and yourself. And those also, you can look even further into that. I mean, the idea of just saying you can't get away from yourself, as you look through these slogans, that's not quite enough. You're really trying to find out, who is this self? How does it operate? What's its modus operandus? That's what we're really looking into, so we can see the patterns and not keep, tooling around in samsara, right? And causing misery to ourselves and others. I mean, occasionally we cause some joy, of course. It's not all or nothing. We have this feeling of extreme. Another interesting point is about setting goals for other people. I know what's best for you, right? And this is really interesting, because I'm also in another class. I'm teaching Charlotte Joko Beck, her Everyday Zen, and she makes a really interesting point in a chapter about experiencing and behavior, pointing out that in every moment we are experiencing, but once that moment is gone, you're no longer experiencing it. It's now become a part of memory. And then what happens is you act, you have behavior. And when you look at other people, all you can see is their behavior. You can't see what they're experiencing. But who they are, or a lot more of who they actually are, is really what they're experiencing and how they're reacting to it. and like us, they're experiencing and holding on to what they can, pushing away what they have to push away at the time. So we can really look into how we get caught up in our assumptions. This is really what a lot of this is about. We are walking around with a bundle of assumptions all the time, and they're like paint on the woodwork. We don't really see that. And then also that this compassionate enterprise, which is the key word of all the all the Lojong slogans. I almost put Wolverine in there, who's Logan, right? It is compassionate action, and that's a lifetime enterprise, and it's also kaleidoscopic. It's got so many ways of manifesting our compassion, which is manifesting in some moments and hiding in others. And one of the reasons that we follow the Buddha is the Buddha went through all this, and the Buddha has let go of all attachments. And the understanding is, and the belief and the faith, and the reason that we are practicing is that we can do this too. So you can look at this transformation of being grateful to everyone as a beginning step. And then you can say, well, why are we grateful? Let's really look at it. Well, because of the way they support us. We can talk about our parents, right? Whether we had good or bad relationships with them. Most of the time, I mean, of course, sometimes parents leave, that's true, but they gave birth to us, and sometimes they clothe and they feed us and they help educate us. And then all the things that they used to do that, whether it was food or education or a musical instrument or whatever, is dependent on other people and times past and all of their karma. So all of these things happen to be available for us. So if we're in fairly good shape now, whatever our particular situation is, we're somewhat lucky. We may not look at that, but we're somewhat lucky, and we can be grateful for all of these things, seen and unseen. And we can also see the errors that other people make and we make, and we can use these errors as mirrors for ourselves. And so this is all this process. This is the beginning of inner change. So, and then we can ask, well, what does it really mean to transform? Another thing that I find in practicing for a long time, I have lots of buzzwords in my mind. And then, let's, transform yourself. That's nice. Well, what does it actually mean? So we're really transforming how we deal with things. We remain the original person who we are, that Dogen said, which is also the continually changing person we are. Uchiyama Roshi talks about the ever-present, all-encompassing self. It's a kind of solution in a way, conceptual solution of dealing with this issue of no self, not self, which is very confusing. But one understanding is that everything we encounter is ourself. And when we're practicing, we're really seeing what that self is and what are we missing? What are we missing, and what are we assuming? What kind of illusions are we making? This is a very good digression. There's been a lot of stuff about artificial AI right now, right? And so there was a case, I heard this in the talk that John Dunn gave, of a lawyer who was representing a client who had some difficulty with a flight on an airplane. I'm not sure exactly what went wrong, but something fairly unpleasant, and he decided to sue the airline. So his lawyer brought the case into court and presented 10 precedents that supported their argument. The judge rejected these precedents. Why? He said, I looked them up. I couldn't find a single one. So what had happened is the lawyer used ChatGPT, and when the software couldn't find a precedent, it made one up. It's called, the technical word for this is a hallucination. So we do this all the time, pretending we know more than we do, or missing what really could be looked at because we're defending our egos. So once again, when we talk about transforming ourselves, we're not talking about transforming the circumstances. It's our reaction to it. And one of the things that comes out in transformation is developing a sense of responsibility, that we're there, we're in the situation, we can't turn away from it, or we have the opportunity not to turn away from it. We recognize that we can possibly make it better. We might not be able to make it better, but at least we won't make it any worse. So that's being responsible. And this is really what cultivation is, in essence, is, because we're out here in the world dealing with all sorts of things. When are we going to impose our view on others and just make the situation worse? Or can we use our skillful means sometimes and be helpful? And so that's taking responsibility, gearing up for interchange. And, once again, looking to our samvega. And the thing, the real skill, we're talking about change is how do we do these things? What techniques are we using? What modality of mind can we call upon? And it's interesting. So going back to that 9th slogan of turning the poisons into virtues, there's I don't know if this is a myth or not, but it's a story in Tibetan Buddhism. I don't know if this is in Chinese, that peacocks eat poison, and that's the cause of their colorful plumage, right? You never heard? No, there's a Peacock Sutra, actually. Anyway, but it's a good metaphor. Who cares, right? If it's true, right? But that we can transform things once again, using the proper exertions, as I mentioned. And this kind of transformation isn't necessarily just about friends and families. It's about all sentient beings, even about insentient beings. Interesting enough, Reb Anderson, the abbot of the Zen Center in San Francisco, was watching some of his students who were about to go into a Zen talk. And they were sitting at a table, and they got up and they just left their chairs like ajar from the table. And he was like, sort of, I don't know that he had compassion for the chairs, but he was recognized, wow, they're going in to hear the truth. And there's the truth right there, that they could have been mindful about their chairs, right? Just as an indication of how we can be sensitive and aware of what's really going on in the world. And then Norm Fisher talks about looking at his grandson, and you can look at any baby and just see how dependent, they're utterly dependent for shelter, for food, for learning how to talk. I mean, think about gratitude for you being able to speak any language, I didn't invent the English language. I certainly didn't invent Chinese, right? But I learned it, and I can speak to people who understand it. They might not always agree with me, but that's just another area where gratitude might not be so apparent. Just our intellectual, mental, cultural heritage, all this stuff, some of it we could do without, but some of it has really helped us grow to where we are. So Shanti Deva says, so like a treasure found at home, enriching me without fatigue. All enemies are helpers in my bodhisattva work, and therefore they should be a joy to me. We can hear this, and it's a good teaching to hear. It might be a lot to swallow. Think of your least favorite political figure. I'm not mentioning any names, but probably some of you have strong feelings. You might not find that they bring joy to you. It might be more anger. But you can, as I said, you can look into this, and see that gratitude isn't just for nice things. And so Dhamma Kachita says, and actually, this work is actually called the Poison Destroying Peacock Mind Training, right? So it's a little stroke for the peacocks out there. If we don't put on the armor of the bodhisattva who willingly embrace others in gratitude, happiness will never come to those in cyclic existence, in samsara. Therefore, willingly accept all that is undesirable. And I think it's really good, just see, what does that feel like when you hear that? It doesn't make me that happy when I hear about accepting all this stuff, but I can look into that and recognize it and perhaps work through it. And, as Trolloc said, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't take an interest in social issues, but only that we should maintain our spiritual perspective and recognize what we can and what we can't do and how we fit in with, whatever kind of organization or movement we're in. So the only thing we really have control over is our own experience. And this control is reinforced by dealing with difficult experience. And, a lot of times we don't have control. We're really out of control. And we're overcome by sadness or anger or rage or whatever. So Chandrakirti states, if you respond with anger when another harms you, does your wrath remove the harm inflicted? Resentment surely serves no purpose in this life and brings adversity in lives to come, if you believe in lives to come. And, the old saying, of course, was being resentful is like drinking a cup of poison and expecting someone else in the room to die. And another saying about this is that being angry and expressing it to someone else is like picking up a molten rock and throwing it at them. So you're already burning your hand before it's left your hand. That's something we don't always notice. And Atisha, who is actually the one responsible, ultimately going back to the 11th century for the Lojong, it's had many different iterations over the subject. So he said, skillful means and wisdom are the two essential ingredients for overcoming conditioned existence. Wisdom without skillful means and skillful means too without wisdom are referred to as bondage. And I think you can also sometimes translate skillful means as compassion. It's sometimes understood that way. And skillful means is, it's like the seventh of the paramitas, right, after wisdom. and it can be understood on a very deep level. Jimmy Yu once told me that it's something that on some level that really an enlightened mind is best at accomplishing. But we can, with whatever wisdom we actually have, we can try to be as skillful as possible. And one thing that's really important about understanding about detachment, it doesn't mean indifference. This has probably been said many, many times, but it's good to reinforce that. And being equanimous, equanimity, that doesn't mean not experiencing any emotion at all. It's really important to be clear about these things because we have all these buzzwords, and it's important not to be misinterpreting them. We're trying to combine these two things, detachment and equanimity, so that we have a sense of equilibrium and we can give proper emotional responses, whatever kind of response is necessary. And also another important thing in not misunderstanding compassion is it doesn't just entail a great outpouring of emotion. I know how Gilbert Gutierrez often says it's not just for the cute bunny rabbit, but it's for the dead rat. It's compassion is doesn't have blinders, doesn't have limits on it. And that's something, we can recognize that we may not feel that way, we may not act that way, but we can see what the proper way is in our understanding. So we need to be focused. We need to have our senses intact and our wits about us, not suppressing our emotions. Very important, right? I mean, I've been saying this many times in the talk, and I think it's just, you can't say it enough, because we really don't like some of our emotions. We really don't like looking at them. And the more we can hold our noses, figuratively speaking, and look at them, the more we will be less trapped by them. As it said, the combination of all that is the very definition of compassion. And there is a Skill in Means Sutra where it says, Bodhisattva great heroes guard against all attachments. They are like this. Dwelling in skill means that, dwelling in skill in means that is inconceivable. They course, in other words, they practice, they experience form, sound, smells, taste, touch, all of which are occasions for attachment, yet they are not attached to them. So, a true bodhisattva, which some of us are working on, is someone who is not turning away from the world, who is engaged, but is not repulsed, not disgusted by these things. And actually, I just saw Inside Out 2, new Disney movie. Some of you may know about it. And this is about a teenage girl, actually it's 13, joining a hockey team, and she's reached puberty, and she's had all these emotions inside one of joy and sadness and anger and fear, one other. And now she's got embarrassment and envy and anxiety. Right. And I hope I'm not giving away the plot too much, but at the end of the movie, what she learns is she has to have all of these emotions. Then this is not a Buddhist movie, right? But she's really seeing how they all work. And when she tried to suppress things, which happens, this movie is so clever, because all of these emotions are portrayed as figures that are in her mind, and they have the console of her brain, and they're trying to manipulate her. It's really very clever, and it sort of is another way of making the point that I'm trying to make. So we can use our meditation on wisdom and try to maintain our equanimity. And I think this is another good quote from Katyayana. Everyday experience relies on the duality of it is and it is not. Right? It's a very good way of like taking a baseline of how we experience things. I remember Master Sheng Yen saying, every day we wake up, we perform activities, and we go to sleep. We wake up, perform activities, and go to sleep, right? So everything we deal with is it is or it isn't, it is not. But for one who relies on the Dharma and on wisdom and thereby directly perceives how the things of the world arise and pass away, for him, there is no it is and it is not. Everything exists is simply one extreme, it says Katyayana, and nothing exists is the other extreme. The Tathagata relies on neither of the two extremes. He teaches the Dharma as the middle way. And very, very important. And I'm going to, there's a lot more to this, but I have a few more slogans to go through. And I can just perhaps finish on the great gratitude to everyone with the understanding that we can really develop patience, accepting suffering, not blaming the harm doer. And this is very important, the patience in the certainty in the true nature of phenomenon. Really looking at the deepest teachings and having our patience relying on that. And now I'm going to do slogan 14, and I'm going to try and just do this ad hoc because this is the most difficult of the slogans, but very important. And I'll try to make this as comprehensible as I can and not get lost in all the particularities. So the slogan reads, seeing confusion as the four kayas is unsurpassable shunyata protection. So this is, Norm Fisher really whittles this down to saying, see confusion as Buddha and practice emptiness. But I think looking at the four kayas is very important. So let's just talk about the four kayas. Now, how many people outside of the Foshers have heard of the kayas, the Dharma kaya and all that? I think anybody who's practiced for a while knows that. And the way that we mostly know it in coming up in the way that I've studied from Theravada and studying in Chan, they're really kind of abstractions. They're not meant to be. They're understood as pure reality. But when we talk of the Dharmakaya, which is emptiness itself, the essential nature of all things, we can hear that, but we can't really see it. And if we did see it, we couldn't exactly express it. So it's kind of an abstraction. And when we talk about the Sambhogakaya, we understand that as the way the Buddha might appear to advanced bodhisattvas. And most of us, I'm putting myself in that group, can't see the Sambhogakaya. And the Nirmanakaya, remember, so the Dharmakaya is and I'll get to body when I finish this. The Sambhogakaya means reward body or enjoyment body. So in that understanding, I guess bodhisattvas enjoy their attainment, and I will get into a little bit about the difference between enjoyment and attachment to pleasure. Nirmanakaya, which is the transformation or appearance body, is what we understand was the case when Shakyamuni Buddha was here 2,500 years ago, but we can't see that either. So that's usually our understanding of these things. And it's important to understand what kaya means. It means body most literally, but it also means form and dimension and kind of a collection of properties. This is what Khentrul Rinpoche talks about. And I think that's very helpful. So when you talk about it from this Tibetan or Lojong perspective, things seem very different. And then there is a fourth kaya, which is the Svabhavika kaya, which is includes all of the kayas, showing that they're not different, that they all have the same instantiation. They all are all participate in non-duality, if such a thing is possible. So the way that a lot of teachers in this tradition portray these kayas is that the Nirmanakaya, so these are all us. All these kayas are us right now, but we have different access to them, if you will. So the Nirmanakaya is what we see and hear. This is what we are, our bodies, our five senses. And that is associated with the different realms. Now, this may get a little confusing, but I hope not. You know, we know about we live supposedly in the desire realm, beings above us in the form, and then in the form realm, right? So looking at the Nirmanakaya the way that I just said, this is what we see and what we think and what we hear and how our relative experience is manifesting. On that level, we live in the form realm, right? This is very different from the way we usually understand things, but it's can be helpful if it doesn't prove to be too confusing in understanding how the transformation can work within a given state, that we can go from one realm to the other. So I'm just starting. So the way that we are in the world is the Nirmanakaya. Right. Now, what happens, let's say if we start to practice and we start getting in touch with the deeper level, which could be the Dharmakaya, which is the ultimate level, they actually use terms in Tibetan of like activity, sparks flying, insight. So when you're starting to connect outside of your everyday experience, right? Because most of us who are not practicing, I'm talking about myself when I didn't practice, so we're just walking around with our view of the world, and you just don't know anything is other than your view of the world. Everybody else is wrong. You start to practice and you start to say, wow, there are other people here besides me. I didn't know that. I thought the world revolved around me. So, one second. You start to get in touch with this connectivity of the Sambhogakaya. And then when one has a final breakthrough, so to speak, one is then in the Dharmakaya. So these kaya, and remember, by calling it a body, the way, you know, when I first learned about these, once again, in the early years in the 70s, I learned about the formless realms 28 through 31, where the beings don't have physical bodies. But if you understand what kaya means, then they do have bodies. They're just not physical bodies because they haven't departed from suffering in that realm, even though they live for millions and millions of years. So it's it might be helpful to see that there's kind of another way of understanding what kaya is. So, and Chogyam Trungpa gives the example of the Dharmakaya is the ocean. The Sambhogakaya are the waves. And the ship sailing on the ocean is the Nirmanakaya. I don't entirely understand that, but I really like it, at least at this point. It sort of talks about how we are tossed about in a variety of things and we're not seeing it, but we're part of everything. So this view of the four kayas, and of course this Bhavika kaya encompasses all those, shows no differentiation between all of these variety of things. So that's my take on what the kayas are and how we can understand them. So now the question is, okay, how do you use this? And to my mind, the way that you use this is looking back at what we were talking about earlier, is about our sense of self. And I was talking about the Uchiyama's sense of self, which encompasses everything. When we really look at this issue of clinging to self and being attached to self and referencing the world through self and trying to get out of it, it's very difficult to get out of, right? So by using this sense of the kayas, of seeing that there's all of these different qualities to our experience, and they may have a greater range than we might understand, and understanding that they're ultimately shunyata, they're ultimately emptiness. And when we can see that things are empty, it's easier not to get caught up in them. And I'll just talk about Norm Fisher very quickly. Says that that once again that it's about overcoming self, and he reduces this whole slogan 14 to there only being love and being. You know, we look at our emotions on a deeper level: confusion, resistance, pain, fear, grief, etc. And we unhook and we see time passing. Even now is gone. We see the crazy wonder of the unfolding, and we view everything in terms of life and death and merging. What's happening is transformation. So I'm going to go now to number 15, which is do good, avoid evil, appreciate your lunacy, and pray for help. The way this is normally expressed is do good, avoid evil, make offerings to evil beings, and pray for help from Dharma protectors. And this whole slogan is about how we're orienting ourselves to the world. So that the slogan we did before is really talking about kind of looking to absolute bodhicitta to help us. And this slogan is more expanding outside how we act towards other people. So I've already spoken a little bit about doing wholesome acts, being good, and understanding the deep well within us from where those kind of actions can happen. And I can do the same thing with the being evil, right? Of avoiding evil. Sorry, that was my inner evil coming out. So, and I think, just because of time, I'm going to work with what Norm Fisher says about appreciating your lunacy. And what this means, in Tibetan, the Dons, D-O-N-S, are the wrathful beings, and also they are the things that we have pushed away. And so by making offerings to them, and what an offering is a vow or a gesture towards self-transformation, right? When you make offerings to the Buddha doesn't need a new toaster oven, right? Buddha doesn't need anything. What the Buddha is looking for is for us to practice and to realize non-attachment. So when we are looking at the dons, the wrathful beings, we're able to look into our own clinging and our own fears. We can look deeply into it. And the idea of making offerings to it just continues kind of what I said, making it more concrete, right? So once again, this is a Dharma talk. Everything's conceptual, but there are practices, you know, and in Chan, there are many ways of repenting or purifying the mind. There are various ways that we can approach that, so that these become practices, not just conceptual understandings. And then also praying for help, which is something we often do in a variety of ways, but we can also look and see how we might be attached to our helpers, how we're hoping that we can just lie back, and like that guy I mentioned in couples therapy, and just everything comes to you and you don't have to do anything. The Dharma protectors are just going to do that for you. And you know, so one of the things that is also, it's very important, so I just want to mention, is about the accumulation of merit. And that can also be really misunderstood. And if it's translated into the accumulation of merit skill and merit skills, then it makes more sense, because we can't put merit in a bank, which is often the way that some people think of merit. And what merit really means is actual actions that are intervening in your own or other people's karma. Right? So it's really a deep participation in action. And so let me just go to the last slogan, and this will conclude the third point of the 7-point path. Immediately join whatever you meet with meditation. Whatever you meet is the path. So what Pema says about this is that interruptions awaken us. She calls them surprise gifts. And I once, and believe me, I'm not like this generally, but I once got a totally crazy bill from a doctor, hundreds of dollars more than I owned. And I don't do this very often, but at that point, I opened the envelope and I said, oh, look, somebody sent me a dozen roses. And I was able to call up the office without screaming at them and clear it up. I'm not like that all the time, but sometimes you can, you know, just accepting things that just come out of the blue. And just notice how our desire that things be pleasant and that they not be unpleasant, and that we continually want something else. And so also this reinforces what I said earlier about meditation not being confined to the cushion, right? Meditation, a clear mind, an accurate mind is something available to us at all times. And so just accepting good or bad, that, you know, things happen. And Norm Fisher says, in spiritual practice, there are no breaks and no mistakes. We're always practicing whether we know it or not. You're always on the path, never lost. He makes this point. I think this is really a wonderful point. And I think it's a good point to conclude with. Norm Fisher says that even if you've stopped practicing for a while, you're not really engaged in Dharma. And of course, I can back this up with the Lotus Sutra that says we're all going to be Buddhas, but he's talking about a more mundane way of really having confidence in yourself, having confidence in the path, not being overcome by guilt and self-blaming. That, you know, the path is always available to us, and we're always on it one way or another. I mean, and to see that is really a remarkable accomplishment. So it's 12:20. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Lojong practice. And so we have some time for questions or comments.
Okay, my question is that you just mentioned that, you know, the continuity of the desire is the key of the suffering. Is it desire is the good drive or the bad drive in terms of the negative or positive drive? So it's the same with the suffering. I had one guy saying that, you know, something, we need suffering because the suffering is the blessing.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate?
That's very interesting. You know, just reading Uchiyama's book on Dogen's Bendowa, he said something I'd never really heard in the teachings. He said that there is suffering that we really should avoid. I mean, especially when we're giving ourselves a problem, we're our own worst enemy. But he also said there are things where we must suffer. I thought that was really interesting, that we, you know, things we can't avoid. But it's a very good question. Is ultimately, suffering is a label that we have. Events are happening, causes and conditions are rising and falling. We're the ones labeling it, and we're the ones who are reacting to our own labels. So in one sense, that's a process we have to go through. So suffering is necessary, I would say. Okay. But there's also that, you know, as Shifu said in his book, there is no suffering. There is no suffering. It's, you know, as the Heart Sutra said, it's an illusion.
Right. Yeah. How about the, let's say, the desire? The Bodhisattva is vowed to deliver numerous sentient beings, become attainment of the Buddhahood, right? Is it just kind of desire? Is kind of suffering?
Yeah, that's another good question. You know, in the 37 wings of enlightenment, 37 things pertaining to Bodhi in Shifu's book. One of the 4 spiritual powers, I think, is Chandra, which is desire, but it's desire which is not based in clinging. You know, it's aspirational desire. And I think that in most of us who are trying to practice with according to our vows and according to our aspirations, there's probably no way that clinging isn't mixed up in it, I think, to be perfectly honest, as we're working on it. But eventually, one can get, I mean, this is what the Buddha did. The Buddha overcame all attachments. So maybe suffering is the launch pad, but eventually, you know, the rocket ship of Dharmakaya, I know my metaphor is going to get really weird, but, you know, just departs from it. And we reach an unbinding and a liberation, and we're probably never totally apart from it. If Bodhisattva practice is dealing with other people's suffering, other people's illusions. So we're always going to have to be dealing with it in a certain way. But, you know, Pema Chodron talks about owning our emotions, owning what happens. Well, eventually there comes a time when we don't own it because it's just not present. There's nothing to own, as far as I can see.
Okay, the last question is it the Buddha nature? You're mentioning the Buddha nature? We're talking about the self nature, okay? those two natures, there's always permanent, existent,
So is
permanent.
Is Buddha nature and self nature, are they always permanent?
Yeah, permanent.
Well, the best way I can answer that is, when you use permanent, once again, that's a concept, right? And in the Dharma Dharmata, it's a work supposedly by Maitreya, it says that permanence and impermanence are really two extremes. So this is the kind of thing that you might want to ask what you're looking for in asking the question. I don't know. Whatever I would say, I don't know if it would resolve it. If I said, oh, absolutely, they're permanent, end of story.
Well, I was in the perspectives of the Buddhism. Are they permanent?
Yeah, well, that's the basic, that's one of the three characteristics, wuchang, impermanence. So there's nothing in the samsaric world that's going to be permanent. Outside in the world of absolute, it says, like in a Song of Mind or one of the poems, the true nature of mind is non-arising. So there's nothing. There's no change. I guess there's no non-change. I think it's we're in the realm of the inconceivable now. I don't think any answer I give is going to be accurate. But I appreciate your question. It's a good question. Don't get me wrong.
Well, if everything you attach or cling to the being or non-being also go to ends. So we got to go the middle way.
That's it. The middle way.
Two sides.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Or being or non-being. Right.
Yeah. I want to see if there are any other questions. Just in case anyone online. Okay.
Okay. If you have any question, please raise your hand and unlock. You can unmute your microphone and just speak out. Okay, Ching, Professor Ching, please unmute your mic. Unmute, yeah.
Harry, it's another time of joy to listen to your talk. And hi, 长华法师您好。So I hear what you said about this four kaya, the body things, and I think I might have mishear one thing. That did you say something about transformation of body? Which one is that under? Because later on when you said talk about the four, you have the wave, the ocean, the ship, and the no differences. But I cannot match the transformation of body into each one of the categories. So can you sort of clarify that for me? Thank you.
I said thank you for the question. I said that it is confusing because it's a little bit different than the way we normally understand these things. But the Dharmakaya is the true body, the true nature of the Buddha. That's emptiness, suchness. I mean, once again, it's a label. The Sambhogakaya is the reward or enjoyment body. The Nirmanakaya is the appearance or transformation body. So the Buddha came into the world in that understanding, but in the understanding I was using, we are becoming aware of the way that we actually work in the world in our samsaric selves. We're aware of our our six senses. Svabhavika kaya, that's it's all encompassing. It's kind of another teaching to show that none of the kayas are really apart or separated from any of the other kayas. It's about its continual unfolding. So we're aware at one point, if we practice of Nirmanakaya, not the Buddha, not the Buddha's body. It doesn't mean that. It just means what's actually happening in that our senses are aware of. And then the Sambhogakaya has to do with when we're starting to get in touch with deeper things, and almost literally sparks are starting to fly, or metaphorically, so that we're seeing through the way that we normally hold on to things. That's the Sambhogakaya emerging. And of course, when everything has emerged and there's nothing to hold on, the sense of self has utterly disappeared. That's the Dharmakaya. So it's kind of working in and outside of time, like the way we sort of understood it before is kind of somehow geographical, that there's the Dharmakaya, well, it's all over there, and the Sambhogakaya is some bodhisattva somewhere else, and the Nirmanakaya has disappeared. That's kind of the earlier understanding. And so I don't know if that helped, but it's definitely a different take on these things. But the idea that we personally, all of us, can participate in all of that, I think, is really quite wonderful.
Yeah. And it seems like it's sort of stepwise. Is it, the levels of that? Is there an order, or it's all together?
That would be. If people were coming up to me and calling me world honored one, I think I could answer that.
Okay. But thank you for the clarification. Today, what you taught is very, very useful. I mean, we can almost apply it to everyday life in our own mind, looking at inner self and all that. So thank you for your Dharma teaching. Yeah,
I think this stuff is really worth deeper study. Thank you.